The demolition sign went up, a cold sentence for the old museum building. But every morning, a silent resistance takes place before its iron gate. The veteran, Caleb, and his dog, Rogue, would stop on their walk to watch Mr. Elias, the elderly curator, rest his hand on the gate like the last soldier defending his fortress. Not a word was spoken, but in that silence, there was an extraordinary power. It wasn't just mourning. It was a vigil for a forgotten secret, a truth hidden somewhere inside that they believed still existed. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Where are you listening to this story from? The town of Harmony Creek, Vermont, revealed itself slowly, like a secret whispered between ancient maple trees. For Caleb Reed, a man who had spent the last 12 years in the vast, loud emptiness of the sky, the quiet was a balm. He was 32, with the lean build of a runner and the guarded eyes of someone who had seen too much. The U.S. Air Force had given him a purpose, but it had taken his peace. Now, he was here to find a piece of it back, to connect with a past he only knew from a faded photograph. His great-grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Reed, a man born in this very town. At his side, trotting with the easy confidence of a loyal friend, was Rogue. A 4-year-old German Shepherd, Rogue, was a striking animal. His coat a rare mix of silver gray and brilliant white that turned heads wherever they went. He was intelligent, calm, and devoted to the man who had rescued him. Their third day in town, a walk led them to a proud 2-story brick building set back from the main road. The sign, its letters faded by decades of sun and snow, read Harmony Creek Historical Museum. It looked tired, a relic from another time, the windows clouded with a fine layer of dust. Caleb felt an unexpected pull, a sense of belonging to a place he'd never been. He looped Rogue's leash around a sturdy iron post near the entrance and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood. A man stood behind a large wooden counter, carefully cleaning a small silver locket with a soft cloth. He was tall and thin, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and kind, weary eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. This was Mr. Elias Vance, the museum's curator and sole employee. He looked up as Caleb entered. "Good morning," Elias said, his voice gentle. "Not many visitors these days. What can I help you find?" "I'm looking for information on my great-grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Reed," Caleb explained. "He fought in the First World War. The record said he was from Harmony Creek." A light sparked in Elias's eyes. Reed, of course, a town hero. Then just as quickly, the light dimmed, replaced by a profound sadness. He set the locket down. "I am sorry to tell you this, son, but you've come at a difficult time. The town council voted last month. They're selling the building. Everything in here, it will all be sold at auction. The letters, the diaries, the town's entire memory. Gone." The words hit Caleb with surprising force. It felt like a personal loss, a door to his own history slamming shut just as he'd found the key. He saw the same raw grief reflected in the old curator's face, a shared mourning for a past neither of them could save. As they stood in a heavy silence, a soft whining sound broke the stillness. Caleb turned. Rogue, who had been sitting patiently by the door, was now on his feet, his ears perked. The dog walked with a strange purpose into an adjoining room, a small, dusty library. He ignored the rows of books and went directly to a dark corner dominated by a massive, unmoving bookshelf. There, he stopped, nudging his nose against the floorboards and letting out another low, insistent whine. Caleb watched him, a small frown creasing his brow. It was strange, but he was too consumed by the weight of Elias's news to give it more than a passing thought. It was an old building full of strange smells. That's all it was. Caleb couldn't just walk away. Looking at the old curator's defeated posture, he felt an echo of the same helplessness he'd often felt himself. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have time. I'd like to help you sort through these records if you'll have me, to make sure things are properly documented before the auction." A flicker of gratitude warmed Elias's face. "I would appreciate that more than you know, son." And so, their work began. For days, the two men worked side by side in the quiet, dusty archives, a strange partnership between two generations. Elias would share stories of the town's past, his voice bringing life to the faded photographs and handwritten letters. Caleb, in turn, found himself opening up, speaking of the sense of duty and history he'd felt in the Air Force. Rogue was a constant, calming presence, lying peacefully near the desk, his head resting on his paws, as if he understood the importance of their solemn task. It was during the third afternoon of this work that Caleb found it. He was carefully going through a wooden crate filled with old, leather-bound diaries from the war. One of them felt different. The leather was worn smooth, and the name on the inside cover was written in a careful, elegant script. Theodore Vance. Caleb's heart gave a lurch. He opened it to a page marked with a folded corner. The ink faded, but still clear. The entry was dated October 1918. It spoke of mud, fear, and the deafening roar of artillery. Then, the handwriting grew shaky. We were pinned down, a nest of machine guns tearing us apart. I was hit. I thought it was the end. Then, through the smoke, he came. Sergeant Thomas Reed. He pulled me from that hell, carried me back to the trench while bullets tore through the air around us. He saved my life today. I owe him everything. If I ever have a son, I will tell him the name, Thomas Reed. Caleb's hands trembled. He read the passage again, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. This wasn't just a historical record. This was his family. This was Elias's family. He carried the diary over to the old curator, his finger pointing to the entry. Elias adjusted his glasses and began to read. He fell silent, his breath catching in his throat. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining with tears that traced new paths through the dust on his cheeks. "My grandfather," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He told me stories of a brave sergeant, but I never knew his name. All these years." The weight of the discovery settled between them, a sacred, unbreakable bond forged in a muddy trench a century ago. The fight to save the museum was no longer just about preserving a town's history. It was now about honoring the legacy that tied their two families together. Through his tears, Elias shared one final piece of the past. "There's a town legend," he said, his voice barely audible. "The man who founded this town, he supposedly left a will. The Forgotten Will, people called it. It was said to have deeded this building to the town forever, on the condition it always be used as a museum. But it was lost generations ago. Just a fairy tale people tell themselves." Caleb looked at the open diary in his hands, then at the hopeful, heartbroken face of his new friend. A fairy tale. It seemed that's all they had left. A heavy gloom settled over the Harmony Creek Historical Museum as the final week began. The quiet, thoughtful work of sorting history had been replaced by the grim, mechanical task of packing it away. The hollow echo of their footsteps, the screech of packing tape, the sight of empty glass cases. Every detail was a reminder of their failure. Caleb and Elias worked in near silence, each man lost in his own sorrow. With every fragile photograph and worn leather diary they placed into a cardboard box, it felt as if they were sealing the coffin on the town's soul. The sense of helplessness was a physical weight, pressing down on them, making every movement an effort. Amidst the despair, Rogue's behavior grew more intense. He no longer lay quietly. The silver-gray German Shepherd was restless, pacing between the main hall and the small library. His attention was fixed solely on the forgotten corner, on the massive, immovable bookshelf. He would return to it again and again, whining softly, a sound full of urgency. He would press his wet nose to the dusty floorboards, nudging at one specific plank. Then he would use his paw, not scratching wildly, but with a deliberate, gentle scrape, scrape, scrape against the wood. The sound was a quiet but constant rhythm in the funereal atmosphere of the museum. By the third day of packing, Caleb's nerves were frayed raw. The physical and emotional exhaustion was taking its toll. Rogue's persistent scratching finally broke through his control. He turned from a box of Civil War medals, his voice sharp with stress. "Rogue, knock it off. That's enough." The dog flinched at his tone, his ears flattening, but he didn't move from the spot. Before Caleb could say more, Elias placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Hold on, son," the old man said, his voice soft. "Think about it. He is an intelligent animal. From the first day you came here, he has been drawn to that exact spot, not anywhere else. Just there. Animals sometimes sense things we don't. Maybe we should listen to him." Caleb looked from Elias's earnest face to his loyal dog, who was looking back at him with pleading eyes. The anger drained out of him, replaced by weary curiosity. Just then, the rumble of a heavy engine outside broke the silence. Caleb walked to the tall front window and looked out. A large flatbed truck was parking on the grass, and two men in bright yellow vests began unloading equipment. They hammered a large, professionally printed sign into the lawn, right next to the faded museum placard. It read, "Future site of the Harmony Creek Plaza." The site was a final, brutal blow. Hope, which had flickered so briefly, was now all but extinguished. The late afternoon sun cast long, sorrowful shadows across the museum floor. The last box was sealed. A profound quiet filled the space, a silence of utter defeat. Elias Vance stood by the door, keys in his hand, his shoulders slumped. It was over. All that was left was to lock the door and walk away forever. "It's time, Caleb," he said, his voice raspy with unshed tears. "Come on, Rogue. Let's go, boy." Caleb called his dog, but Rogue didn't move. The German Shepherd was lying in the dusty corner of the library, his body blocking the path. He refused to get up. When Caleb took a step toward him, Rogue did something he had never done before. He let out a soft, sharp bark, not of aggression, but of pure insistence. He looked directly at Caleb, then lowered his head and began scratching at the floorboard beneath the ancient bookshelf, his claws making a loud, urgent sound against the old wood. He would not be ignored. Not this time. A silent understanding passed between Caleb and Elias. All logic told them it was hopeless, that they were just delaying the inevitable, but the dog's conviction was absolute. It was a single, unwavering light in the suffocating darkness of their despair. Without a word, they walked over to the bookshelf. It was a colossal piece of furniture, made of solid oak, and it hadn't been moved in a century. They found their footing, gripped the dusty wood, and pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan that echoed through the empty museum, the shelf began to move. Inch by painful inch, they scraped it away from the wall, their muscles straining, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, it was done. They stood, exhausted, looking at the patch of floor that had been hidden for so long. And there it was. Just as Rogue had indicated, one of the planks was different. Its edges were cut more sharply. The nails securing it were of a slightly different make. It was undeniable. Using the flat end of an old metal ruler from a nearby desk, Caleb carefully pried at the edge of the board. With a final creak of protest, it lifted away. Beneath it was a small, dark hollow. Elias reached into the space, his trembling fingers closing around a small, rectangular object. He pulled out a tin box, rusted and coated in the dust of ages. His hand shook so badly that Caleb had to help him work the lid open. It came free with a metallic pop. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a folded document, tied with a brittle ribbon. With the reverence of a prayer, they unfolded the yellowed paper. The ink was a deep, rich brown, the handwriting a beautiful, looping script. They read the first lines together. "I, Jonathan Harmony, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my property at 14 Elm Street, known as the Harmony Building, to a trust for the perpetual preservation of the history of this town." They stared at the words, unable to process them. They read them again. It was real, legally binding, unbreakable. Tears streamed down Elias's face, washing away the dust and the despair. Caleb knelt and wrapped his arms around his dog, burying his face in the soft, gray fur of the quiet hero who had done the impossible. The town hall meeting was packed, the air thick with tension. At the front of the room, a sharp-suited developer tapped his pen impatiently, while the town council members looked on with somber resignation. Then, the doors opened, and a murmur went through the crowd as Caleb and Elias Vance walked to the podium. Elias's hands no longer trembled. He stood tall, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong, resonating with the authority of history itself. He presented the will. He read the key passages aloud, the words of Jonathan Harmony echoing across a century to seal the museum's fate. The developer's face contorted in a mask of fury. The council members stared, their mouths agape in stunned disbelief. The motion to sell was not just defeated, it was obliterated by a truth that had been sleeping beneath their feet all along. The story spread through Harmony Creek like a wildfire in a dry field. The tale of the quiet veteran searching for his roots, the dedicated old curator who never gave up hope, and the heroic German shepherd who sensed a secret no one else could. It was a story of miracles, of history, and of faith. A wave of pride washed over the town, replacing apathy with action. The ugly developer's sign on the museum lawn was torn down, and in its place, a new, hand-painted one appeared. Home of the Friends of the Museum Society. People arrived with donations, with tool belts, with paintbrushes, and gardening gloves. The quiet, dusty halls of the museum were suddenly filled with the sounds of community, of laughter, and of renewal. Caleb was no longer an outsider. He was at the center of it all, working alongside Elias, coordinating volunteers, and helping to design new exhibits that would properly honor the town's past. He had come to Harmony Creek seeking a faint connection to one man, but he had found a deep connection to an entire community. One evening, as the restoration work was nearing completion, Elias and the newly formed board of directors formally asked Caleb to join them. He accepted without hesitation. He had found more than just information about his great-grandfather. He had found his own purpose. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the Harmony Creek Historical Museum held its grand reopening. The brickwork was clean, the windows sparkled, and the halls were filled with families and children, their faces bright with discovery. Caleb stood across the street, watching the vibrant scene. At his side, calm and regal, sat Rogue. The Vermont air was cool on his face, the scent of fallen leaves mingling with the smell of fresh paint. The ghosts of his past were finally quiet. He looked down at the magnificent dog who had led him here, not just to a place, but to a life. They were no longer just visitors. They were home. They were the guardians of memory. Sometimes the most important truths are not spoken in words, but are felt in the quiet, unwavering loyalty of a friend. They are written in the history of the places we love, and whispered by the intuition of an animal who sees the truth we cannot. Caleb and Rogue's story reminds us that every community has a legacy, and every soul has a purpose worth fighting for. If their journey has touched your heart, please help us share this message of hope and perseverance with others. By subscribing, you become a guardian of these memories with us, ensuring these stories are never forgotten. There are so many other quiet heroes in this world, and the next story is appearing on your screen right now.